sir.
Okay.
No, not yet. You are still muted, sir. No, you are still muted.
We're not able to hear you. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. I don't know what's happening. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for associating me with this elite group and introduce, Swarnavel Eswaran's documentary. Well, I have a friend, who hails from, the town of Nagapattinam. Well, Nagapattinam, as many of you know, it is on the southeast coast of the state of Tamil Nadu. And well, I used to make fun of my friend, by reciting a poem by the Tamil language poet Kalamegam. Okay, now, this poet Kalamegam, he was famous for his poems which had pun and irony. The particular poem I used to recite was sung by Kalamegam in the town of Nagapattinam. It was on, what is known as Katan Chatram. Okay, Chatram means chowdhury, where pilgrims or travelers can stay and have food, free of cost. And Kalamegam, he was known for his poems which will say, two different things. Okay, for example, there's a poem which will read like it is on a snake, but the same poem may mean to be about a banana. But in the poem on Katan Chatram, the chowdhury, okay, in Nagapattinam, Kalamegam appears to mean just one thing: how terrible the chowdhury was. The reason being that, he was served food very late at Katan Chatram. So he was very unhappy and he was very critical of the chowdhury. But when I, used to make fun of my friend, he used to, give me another meaning, which was quite the opposite. Okay, like it is as though Kalamegam wrote in praise of the food served there. So by extension, the welfare facilities, in that chowdhury, and looks like, the poem can be interpreted in both ways, thanks to the richness of the language. Well, we can see the richness of the film language in today's film under discussion. It is on the Nagapattinam of the 21st century. It's concerning the relief operations there after it was devastated by tsunami in the year 2004. It presents two diagonally opposite views about how the relief and rehabilitation and operations were done there. On the one side, we have, Revati, who is the founder director of an NGO. She's also a writer, filmmaker, and publisher. As a highly articulate intellectual, she is, critical of both the government and the NGOs, although she herself led an NGO. On the other side, we have the collector J. Radhakrishnan, who is revered by the people of Nagapattinam, especially the children who grew up in the orphanage, they all revere him even today. Radhakrishnan was known for his efficiency in handling the situation and his disaster recovery and relief measures. He was appreciated by Bill Clinton. That was when Clinton visited Nagapattinam district as the United Nations Secretary General's special envoy for tsunami recovery. That was in 2005. He lauded J. Radhakrishnan's administrative skills. So the film has the structure of a dialogue between Revati and J. Radhakrishnan. And there's a drone which circles round and round and round. It goes over the land and the beach, and it shows the dichotomy between the land and the sea. As much as the people depend on the sea, it can unleash its fury sometimes, as it happened in 2004. And the title is very interesting because it is it reminded me of Sati There's Distant Thunder, because it sounded somewhat like that. Because the tsunami was caused by the waves that were set off by a powerful undersea earthquake at a far distance near Sumatra Island, Indonesia. So, the title, Waves from the Deep, it suggests that it's a butterfly effect. And looking at what the film is about, the film is so comprehensive in covering so many aspects of the devastation caused by the tsunami and its aftermath. People losing their near and dear, understanding grief, trauma, counseling, people losing livelihood, providing temporary shelters as immediate relief, then building permanent homes, giving livelihood support because many of the fishermen, they lost their boats and all that, or they had to get their boats repaired, taking care of the welfare of women and children because they were the most affected, providing clean water, understanding government's responsibility, making effective use of aid that pours in because you had so much money that poured in, and how do you make effective use of that? The role of non-profits, ecology, fear of proselytization that comes with aid. It's total. So it's interesting to know that after 10 years, Revati, who was very critical of the relief and rehabilitation measures, she has revised her opinion to a certain extent. She concedes that a lot of good has come. Children benefited a lot thanks to the school set up with economic funds. She herself set up one. Homes were built for the homeless. So it's a debate we see in the film with point, counterpoint, and a resolution. And what is really interesting is that Swarnavel Eswaran has revisited Nagapattinam after 10 years. That's a great idea because, well, that has helped to come up with the resolution. And looking at what kind of document, how do you categorize it? Well, we have the expository mode of documentary film, which speaks to the viewer directly with a voiceover, and Nagapattinam is certainly not in that mode. There's no voice of God commentary. The director Swarnavel has refrained from imposing his opinion. He's almost not there, although he's physically there. He's not put himself, which is great. He has let ideas emerge on their own and find their resolution. The director has interacted with the various kinds of stakeholders, interviewed them extensively to bring out the viewpoints. So the observational, the document is largely what is called, participatory mode. It also uses the observational mode by capturing various aspects such as the people, okay, with various faiths, they coexist together. Okay, just one example. And there are the, recurring drone shots. Okay, they are, poetic, I thought. Okay, so it has these modes, the participatory, then you have the observational and poetic modes which are at play here. And the backbone of the documentary is, of course, the interviews. And the people interviewed are so natural and articulate. It's hard to get a performance like that, even, with, seasoned actors. So, well, I would like to know, when Swarnavel, talks about the film, and I would like to know how exactly he managed it, because, most of the kids, they speak out so well. It's heartening to hear them saying what they want to become. Even, at this time of tragedy, somebody says, I want to become a lawyer. That's great. And Revati is forthright in saying that government can't pass on its obligations to NGOs, because government definitely has a role to play. It cannot shirk, its role. And she draws a distinction between, demanding from the government one's rights and demanding from NGOs. When you demand from NGOs, it becomes a charity. Whereas when you demand from the government, you're demanding for, your rights. Okay, so she makes a very good distinction between the two. She's critical of NGOs too, although she herself runs an NGO herself. She admits that NGOs aren't competent in engaging with communities, which is very, very, very important, especially when you build homes. It becomes very important. She also talks about the turf war between NGOs. And there's a woman from a self-help group. She talks about how NGOs don't understand the need for, cotton sarees in the hot climate, because the women have been given silk and nylon sarees. Okay. And the woman coordinator of an organization called Sneha talks about lack of compensation for women, because compensation is given only for, damage of a boat or something. And by that, the assumption is that the entire family as a unit has benefited, period. They don't take into consideration the fact that women independently work and they marketed fish and all that. They supported the family. Even having to live with the, smell of the fish has been discussed in a couple of interviews. Revati talks about how the fishing community lives as an extended family. I thought this is pretty good. The NGOs didn't understand it, and they suspected that, the extended family, they took the kids, with them just for, collecting the money, okay, which is not true. One of the most touching observations made by Revati is that more women died, many more women, in fact, than men. That's because they tried to save their jewelry and children. There are so many dead bodies of women clinging to their kids. Perhaps if they had been selfish, they might have escaped. But no, they didn't do that. They gave their lives. Annie George talks about the lack of a long-term stake of NGOs there, because they won't be around to face the music in future. Okay. And Anjali of Christian Aid, she is very balanced in her response, I thought. So these interviews have come out so well in the documentary. And well, many of you would have heard about Swarnavel's fiction film Kattumaram, which means catamaran. Well, I thought the experience Swarnavel has gone through while making this non-fiction film, okay, appears to have given impetus to making a fiction film set in Nagapattinam, okay, that is Katumaram, which means a catamaran, as I said already. It's about a fisherman who raises his orphaned niece. As Revati says in the documentary, that the extended family will take care of the orphaned relative. The fisherman in the film takes up the responsibility of caring for his niece, and he makes an earnest attempt to get her married as a parent would do. The ravaged houses, people undergoing trauma of losing their family members, the school which has been set up by the NGO, etc., they all form the background of the film. So the documentary, Nagapattinam, Waves from the Deep, well, it has given rise to a fiction film, which is Katumaram. Yeah, to sum up, it's an outstanding documentary that has recorded the whole gamut of aspects of the aftermath of a giant disaster. It's the documentary is very, very helpful in coming up with a strategy in the future for early warning, disaster management, relief, and rehabilitation. I'm very fortunate to have known Swarnavel Eswaran in early 90s when he was bubbling with energy and enthusiasm as a graduate from FTII Pune. It's great to see him grow into such an accomplished academic and a filmmaker. He speaks for his dedication and commitment to the subject that he used to go to Nagapattinam every alternate summer. He used to come from US and spend a month in Nagapattinam from 2005 to 2014. It's amazing. Came to know from Swarnavel that he shot the film with a small camera, that is Sony PD 170 in standard definition, because this was pre-HD video days. So the documentary has black and white, color, high resolution video. It shows how technology has progressed so much within a decade. Apart from videography, editing, and direction, Swarnavel has taken part in other departments also, like recording the sound. It'd be good to hear from him his experience in shooting the documentary with a minimal crew. Swarnavel has used the material he shot in his documentary class at Michigan State University. The title in the beginning says that it's a collaboration with his students. Swarnavel can elaborate on these two aspects. But once again, I thank the organizers to give me an opportunity to introduce, the wonderful documentary by Swarnavel, and many congratulations to him. Thank you.
Thank you very much for laying out all those very interesting aspects of the documentary. It was indeed informative, and yet I think, as you said, it held back without trying too hard to intervene to make us form a particular kind of opinion on it. It threw up a number of points, and I think you very rightly pointed to the many voiced sense that we get from watching this documentary. Anyone who would like to begin the discussion or take the discussion forward from this point? Anything you want to say? You're most welcome. You can just unmute yourself so that I know that you want to speak. Yes, Geeta, please go ahead.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Babu Subramanian, for those very interesting comments you made on the film. And what struck me was, for a documentary like this, uh, Swarnavel could have used, found footage of the devastation, but instead he has chosen to stay away from those images. And what he provides us are some really beautifully short films of short scenes of the sea when it is absolutely calm, and of the town as well. So I thought that was a very good strategy, because it kind of provided a kind of contrast to what the sea can do when it is, at its worst. And that is something that is not shown in the film. Instead, it comes to us through the interviews. So I thought that was very well done. So probably Swarnavel could tell us something about whether he made a very conscious choice to stay away from images of the devastation. Was that planned, Swarnavel?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Geeta, for the introduction, and Nikhila for the introduction, and Geeta for your question, and Babu for your detailed. Thanks a lot. For detailed analysis of the film. Thanks also for your kind words, and also you pointed all the important, significant, moments and sections in the film. And to respond to Geeta, that is, yes, I mean, because normally today you can see that, in this, new media, or even prior to that, when I was in 2005, you will find on the internet, that there is a lot of, photographs and images of overall, tsunami, and also particularly Indian Ocean tsunami. From Indonesia, then Sri Lanka, then, Nagapattinam. Then, the challenge is, this, how to go beyond this kind of spectacles, which makes us more and more immune, to these images of, whether it is violence or, wrath of nature, or, that is one decision. I thought that if I can have only the narration of people and their suffering, kind of oral recording, and then show the visuals of as it is now, the sea, the land. So that was, one of the decisions I made. So to briefly talk about the history, that mainly, as Babu pointed out, I had a small PD 170 camera. Of course, it is much larger than the DSLRs now or the cell phone. It is a Sony camera which runs on a tape, mini DV tape, we call that. So that is like standard definition. So in this film, you can see, some shots, early interviews are in standard definition, so when I went, I had the camera in 2005. That is 6 months after the tsunami, because tsunami struck Nagapattinam on the day after Christmas on 2004. So when I went, the succeeding summer, then I had this camera. I went to Nagapattinam and recorded the interviews. And then I was using, those footage in my classes when I was teaching documentary, particularly regarding the question of, the power of the documentarian. Particularly when it comes to representation of trauma. What happens? You go in in a situation like this, and you meet children, and they say that their entire family got washed away. In about that, in that 20 minutes, there were children, who were the youngest ones, and the mother had come with the elder ones to market the fish, and the father was coming back with the fish, and the tsunami wiped away, the entire family. So So then, initially, I mean, your intelligence comes into play because you have done some work and research, you boast of your knowledge of, as a teacher of documentaries, but it doesn't help, when you are standing in front of people and who expose you to, what life is, how fragile and, what it can do to you. I mean, and in this case, you do not have a binary opposite of an enemy that you can say that this was the person who was responsible for this. So this is further it complicates because C, which is the mother, she gives the food, but she's also taking away, this is like another form of her, so all this, was going through. Then, as Babu pointed out, alternate summers when I went, I had, increasingly smaller cameras, DSLRs, and even there are some cell phone footage in this. So on the one hand, it is also a history of, that kind of recording, that what is possible with the digital when you want to make a documentary in a very kind of, minimal kind of mode, do it yourself kind of a documentary. You're going alone. And later, I mean, whoever your friends, your students are there, they join, but it is going, on and on. Because my interest was basically, I was shooting and then, mostly uncut kind of, material. I was using long segments in my class to talk about, the other theories surrounding, trauma and representation and the difficulty of it. Like if you look at, even, extraordinary, iconic films on Holocaust, you can see that discourse, that there is this great moment, when through this railway track, now the camera will proceed and will stop at a point, and Marker and Klansman will be using it in, different ways in their films, and they point out, to that kind of an impossibility to really go in and show what trauma is. So this is a very important element, and I was also struggling with that, and I was also interested in my own way to talk about disaster management, because what moved me was I generally see, I mean, within academy or within thinking intellectuals, there is this critique, of the digitality or digital capitalism, which is, justifiable and which is real. We can see in this, the kind of globalized world and the kind of inequity it is creating. On the other hand, it also enables this kind of, that visibility, something happens in one corner of the world and it moves people and they are willing to, contribute. So you have more than, 400 million kind of dollars. Sorry, it is $80 million, which is a huge amount, it pours in. So I was also interested, whether what happens with this money, I mean, does it like anything trickles down and really benefits the people? And I was, I wanted to have also an open mind. That is where you have, that as Babu pointed out, I go back after 10 years, after the 10th anniversary, I'm interested in knowing, particularly through Revati, because she was committed, she was creative, she forsook her middle class life, ambitions, and settled down in Nagapattinam, and she still lives there. So there were these kind of NGOs as well, even if she is very critical, and understandably so. So I had many versions. For example, there was a version on NGOs alone, in that there is a focus on NGOs who did a great job, like the Tata Group employees, who do not get money from outside, but the employees contribute a very small amount, but it has such, huge employees on its role that then, they have an NGO and they set up the desalination plant. So that helped Nagapattinam from having further kind of, epidemics, so I also wanted to focus along with, the critique, whatever the good things, which people are capable of doing. So coming back to, Babu's reading of it as this, two streams, I think it is very important in my film, because Generally, that as a documentarian, we want to be apprehensive of the state, rightly so. That is what our masters have taught. And that is the very purpose of a documentary, that it is not there to, affirm the status quo, isn't it? I mean, then that is a different kind of a statist project, a certain kind of FD documentary, not all FD documentary, certain kind of FD documentary or a newsreel. That is the purpose. But here, I mean, as a documentarian, our interest is in questioning and interrogating. But at the same time, that, for example, see, now we have the problem of COVID. What is our immediate thing, that we expect the government should serve us, isn't it? It should give us the booster. It should give us the shots, not only for us. It should do for every individual in every nook and corner, because we know that, these are things which cannot be done by private people. Then if, for example, when the iconic Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak had come to Iowa when I was a student, because, long time back, she was also in Iowa. And so she had come, and when she was talking, she was talking about this concept, worlding, which is very famous now, in terms of its discourse, it has kind of provoked. And at that moment in the Q&A session, she was talking about how, her theory is now being transformed into practice, which she all along wanted to do, how she's starting the schools in Calcutta, in Bengal. And then she was saying how she realized when she's on the ground, that's very important to collaborate with the government. Because see, I will tell you, in Tamil Nadu alone, the government has 1 lakh teachers on its payroll. You can imagine, the network. So, if you want to do real intervention in some nook and corner, it is there already, isn't it? And then you can critique and engage with it and do things. So therefore, all this was also, going in my mind. And then I was looking at Radhakrishnan, and, I was also interviewing him for some time. As you can see in the shot in the school, I'm also present with him. And so despite being, extremely busy, he was, accessible. So I was also moved, with what he was trying to do, with all the, limitations and, things come as a government official. So, but he had also the same kind of drive and, passion to do. So I thought that, let me also be true to that, so this was then, a kind of a dialectical a dialogue, between these two. And also it helped me because, that already, that I was an outsider, and unlike Revati, that I was not continuously staying there. So that's why you will see, in the end also, that I'm interested, that, I have to come out, there is that shot, where I'm trying to, but then, parallelly you can see the shot of the waves, and in the soundtrack, the tears, of this extraordinarily resilient woman, to whom I think it's a homage, that I could see, that in one of my versions, I also talk about that. Whenever I go, I could see, that there is constantly the smell of alcohol, in the air. And it is understandable, because it was not an easy trauma, that not only they lost their family and livelihood, but also the water has become, almost literally, useless for them, in a way, because of the tsunami, that there was no fish. They had to go too far for too little catchment, and some of them were caught, in the border, political war of a different dimension between India and Sri Lanka, and lost their lives, So that is another kind of, story. So within this, I saw, that women were the force, that who could still, despite all this, be resilient, be hopeful, still withstand, as you can see, even in this version, when you see this, hundreds of women, sitting there. So I wanted also to, that document in a way, celebrate that spirit, it's so important. And to me, I also thought using this kind of a small camera does justice, to this kind of a subject, because for a subaltern voice, that it is something, which you can say that it comes from, that kind of a democratic space. You can today, shoot a documentary if you have a heart with your cell phone, and those possibilities it opens up. So I'll stop here. I will engage with other questions like technology, which Babu asked later. So I will open it up and for questions.
Yeah, anyone else who has any other question, please unmute yourselves so I know that you want to come in. While people gather their thoughts, Swarnavel, I was very intrigued when I saw in the beginning that it's shot over a long period of time. And there are several trips that you have made, and you've documented all those trips that you have made. In a sense, then, as you told us now, and also earlier, also in our conversation, you said you have several versions of the film. So, in a sense, there is, I mean, I'm thinking, I read this process like this, that as a teacher and a researcher, you have gone to document a particular kind of tragedy through the voice of the people and the voice of those who are associated with various kinds of activities. These could be NGOs, these could be people from the government. So there is a sense of documenting as it unfolds, as these events unfold. And then there is this moment of kind of reflecting on how it was now looking back, as Revati says, maybe I'm not so critical now of things and so on. So on the one hand, as a teacher and a as someone documenting history, this is one kind of a moment. The other is to make a film, a documentary film, that is to give shape, form, structure, and a sense of coherence. So I'm wondering, in the second process, what was the principle or the structuring device that you adopted? Did you think consciously while you were putting footage together, for your film? Like, for instance, Karan Bali last week was telling us, I didn't think of making a documentary. I just wanted to, just collect various kinds of footage, and then it emerged. So was it like a process like that, which, finally evolved into a film, which we are all watching now? How is it? Can you just reflect on that?
Yes. It's a very important question. I think, the provenance of this film is also because of my investment, in teaching as well. That is, since, that I was hired here as a documentary expression teacher who teaches theory and history and production, making of documentaries. So the rich history of, documentary for me is special because, that all the filmmakers, like Babu, that they are great intellectuals, thinking, like if you look at, say, if you read interviews of Chris Marker or Jean Rouche. Of course, Jean Rouche comes from, anthropology and academic background, but say Chris Marker, or even contemporary, somebody like Michael Moore, or, his investment in political activism, or Errol Morris, who comes from a philosophical background and make films like Thin Blue Line. That they can tell us more about, what we can actually write about their film, isn't it? I mean, because, they really think about, that. So the field of documentary is full of, like, if you today Google Agnes Varda, she has spoken about a documentary, Gleaners and I, more than, all are extraordinary, I mean, immortal, films like Cleo 9 and 5, that because as a documentarian, you engage with people and constantly you are also thinking, how to frame, how to also, the dignity and self-respect of my subject, how to preserve, and while at the same time, how to engage in a way where, that I'm also true to the discourse, of power, of exploitation, So this is something I think, that it challenges us as human beings, our own ethics. On the one hand, the difficulty of, thrusting something, forcefully into, an audience at a time like this, which is a period of anarchy of images, I call, that you want to talk about anything, it is already preempted. It is full of, the internet is full of, the news, the fake news, and the things in between. So then, it's not like an earlier time, when Flaherty went with huge studio cameras and wondered. And today, of course, we read the kind of mistakes he did, but we had this very long history, that think of Zigavartu, and his own writing, his manifestos, that thinking intellectual as a documentarian, isn't it? It begins, right in its provenance, So therefore, when you are a teacher, you are already teaching about all these filmmakers, you are engaging with all the discourses. And today, last 20 years at least, I would say, prior to that, there was absolutely not much, writing on documentaries, but last 15 years, there is a lot. In fact, I could argue that some of the best writings are in the documentary field. Actually, you have great historians, great theoreticians, and great women filmmakers. And the thought around enunciation. That where do you come from? Why don't you foreground that? We are less interested, I mean, as Nichols would say, it's no more about, I talking to you about them. It's about, am I talking about us to you? I mean, where do you come from, and what is your right? And therefore, all this is hanging in your, in your head. At the same time, you are also moved by something which is happening, in your own land, and it is. I think, particularly when I went there, you have some kind of, conscientiousness, isn't it? You have a duty, in fact, to record that. And most importantly, I thought that, it will also help, future disaster management. Even if, that I could, just if it were only a documentation, not a documentary. Of course, being a documentary filmmaker, it is constantly in my mind as well. What I can do. So initially, I just wanted to record and then look at the interviews. So to Babu's, question, all these interviews have been very long, and that also, digital allows us, you can have a mini TV tape, that is in about maybe like 1,200 rupees, you can have 4 hours or 5 hours of tapes. So it kind of freezes from a time when I was young, when I was making films for FD, when the film roll used to be extremely expensive, and where you are constantly in a kind of tension and anxiety of the roll running out. For example, we will get some very meager amount from FD, and not that big films where they invite filmmakers. This is the other kind of where you have not the commissioned ones, the other kind of documentaries. So then you will find 2/3 of the money you are spending just on the raw stock. So very minimum money left. So constantly you are in the tension. You can't allow somebody to be like something to flow organically. You want to cut because you don't have the reel, and you want him to say the exact line, her the exact line you want, and therefore you also put them at unease. So naturally, see, if they look stilted, contrived, it is not their fault. So therefore, when the digital came, like when PD 170 was in my hand, that this was a big freedom. So patiently, I could just put the camera and record, Gravity for an hour and maybe one more tape. So then, we could pick up, those natural moments. So that involves work, but, work, we are so much invested in that, isn't it? Because we are also learning about, these various discourses and the problem, because as a documentarian, this is, that in a way, you're also doing your research, going along, making this film, isn't it? In a subject like this, it's not like making on the history of Central Park in the US, like Ken Burns, so that you do all your research work from the archive and then go and engage. Here it is something, something happened and I'm going somewhere and I'm just having a camera and I'm going there and I'm seeing all this, getting exposed. What was the research work prior to that? Only the exposure through newspaper, headlines that I read 6 months prior, sitting in the US. But when I go there, then I get into the depth and the intersectionality of so many things merging together. So then I'm also learning as a student. But going back to Nikhil's question, being a documentarian, it is also running in my mind, that how I will put all this together as a documentary. When I'm teaching, to my students who will be asking, immediate questions regarding the theory I thought, and how does my documentary resonate with that, or why I'm watching this film in the context of what you were talking last week. So increasingly, I felt, that this is not a documentary, which could be contained, or which could be, a short-term project. You go and you interview a few people, and you edit and you made this film, because it's an ongoing process. Because trauma is, even you can see in the film, that we need some distance, to come out of the trauma. That is why I see when Revati says, that now I am not so critical. See, despite, being, a person who put her heart and minds, into this, the trauma affected her as well. So you can see that, in the interview, in the beginning and interview the later Revati, that so that itself is a process. So I wanted to be open about it. Then I realized, that this could not be, a documentary. I'm just making it like my other projects. So then I, kept on going with the open mind. But of course, as a teacher also, I was invested in this subject, in how to frame things, which escape your frame. This kind of profound, loss, and how people come to terms with that. And then the juxtaposition of this kind of huge amount of money coming in, and there is also a promise, but then you also know, what generally happens, when you have this kind of a situation. So all these apprehensions. So it was, this kind of a discourse where, nothing I could foresee that, yes, I have an answer for this. So I had to go along, just documenting. And finally, I had the material. And then, as I said, it is also, simultaneously a record of, the history of technology. All documentaries are. Today, we can talk about Flaherty and talk about how studio cameras, were the only thing available, and how it affected his aesthetics of even the editing of long shots, mid shots, close-ups in Nanook of the North. Simultaneously, we can talk of the 70s when you had these mobile 16mm cameras, and the Nagra in 1958 when it was invented. Then 60s, at that moment, cinema verite, candid cinema, direct cinema in the US. As Babu also pointed out, technology becomes important. So I saw that this is also important, and suddenly now there was a drone available. So of course, you will be watching a lot of Netflix and other films where drone shots are generally used as fillers or transition shots. You have these beautiful trees and one car is going in between and you go to the next. But then that today it is a democratic field. You can get highly affordable drone which they use for marriages and other functions, and not these big ones, the cinema people use. But it is there, you can see the quality. It is really a democratic kind of field. So then you have the technology, and then why not go and shoot the land and the people, because see that is if you look at the center of the discourse, isn't it? That is they were people in a way much richer than us, that see they go and have a catchment, they get a minimum of 600 to 3,000 rupees. They don't really think of the next day, so they live their life that because she is their eternal mother, and they live by the sea. There is this wonderful wind, and that's why you see suddenly everything is lost. Not only their livelihood, but now they have to be displaced. Then there is the other discourse. Does the state wants us to displace because it now wants to bring, these huge hotels and convert that into a tourist spot, isn't it? So, therefore that was important for me, that the land and the sea, that area, and drone allows that, And the other way I was thinking of this loss, if house or the home is so central to our life, even when you lead, the kind of life, whereas Revati talks about, the men are always absent, they go at, like 1 a.m. to the sea and come back. And naturally, the nature of work is such, they sleep and, again, they have to go. So even if you are spending all the time, but this home is important for you, isn't it? For you to recharge yourself, get back and come back. At the same time, you don't want to live too much away, so that's something unique, that is the provenance of, the community which Revati talks about. And she says in one of the places, these children, cannot go to Bombay or Calcutta. You can't just, transpose them, as you want. So that is, I think, an important statement. So all this was in my mind. And then when drone was available, I thought, that that is what I would do. So my own young friend, Mani Maran, who is a wonderful filmmaker, so he helped me, the drone shots. He had a friend, who could operate this drone, and then we had these drone shots. So parallelly, I would also say it's about a community of this kind of filmmakers at the low end technology, but with big hearts. So that is how we could realize this film. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or anything else you want to say about the film? Any response to the film?
Hi. May I?
Please go ahead. Murali, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Swarnavel sir. Babu is a very good friend of mine. And he asked me to check out this movie. And I really loved the documentary. And sometimes I felt that, perhaps, many people in Tamil Nadu or even in India should have an opportunity to check it out. I thought it's very aesthetically complete and informative as well. I had two observations and perhaps a question, sir. The one that struck me most about the story of a kid is trying to find mother with the volunteers, right? She will cling on to a particular volunteer, and she will realize that it's not her mother, and then she will go on to the next one. That is a very unique, immersive experience that you will be able to transfer it to the viewer. I think that those kind of moments are plenty in the documentary, and it kind of takes a different view from the other documentaries I've seen. It has given an immersive experience, is what I wanted to tell you. The second one is about the music. You've also used first part a North Indian classical music, and the second part there was South Indian music. Maybe that's part of the deep waves of Nagapattinam that you are thinking in your mind. I would like to hear your thoughts on how you got into those sensibilities on that. The third one, of course, is do you have plans to make more documentaries? Obviously, the technology democratization will give you more empowerment. So you can probably go for a little bit more longer, deeper, immersive documentary effort. I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well, sir. Thank you for offering us this documentary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, for your generous and kind comments. I am really moved by it. Yes, you are very right. See that when Revati talks about the child, because the child has the infection, so it is not able to see temporarily because, and it is clinging on, looking at, where is my mother? It's a very moving, that you can see, even, that, such a resilient, Revati, she almost breaks down, when she talks about that. So there, that is the moment you can see, that it's shot in the standard definition. It was a very early moment, when I was doing, and I cut to, when when she says, that he realizes that it was not my mother, I cut to a house, which is kind of devastated. So you can see, that the home and the mother concept, I'm bringing together, and that runs as another subtext, throughout. And you can see when the children are talking about, many a times I cut to literally their houses, when they took me and showed this was the house in the interview, in the class, which Babu mentioned, what do you want to become? Have you met the president? And finally, one child would say, I want to become a teacher. That again moved me, that it was not like the typical, doctor, engineer, or, chartered accountant, it is, so all these things, I think were important, also touch me because of also, my own locus, where I come from, it was very moving for me, and I wanted to put it in that film, that, when they ask, where is your enunciation? Where do you come from? And then, the immersivity, I think, one of the thing I think, that has enabled that is, again, I would say, the idea of, that one is the sync sound, because here I have not used, even for interviews, lapel or other, kind of mics. It's all on the mic in the camera, because I wanted, because whenever, you are in Nagapattinam or even in Tiruchendur, you will know that, it is the sea sound is enormous, the area from Thoothukudi to Tiruchendur, where my mother's place is, and the entire belt, you will find, the roaring of the sea, even at night, when you are sleeping in the cot, miles away, so I thought that, like, let this have that kind of a noisiness, this film. So you can see that, that is also giving, this kind of immersivity, because constantly, even if the sea is not there in the shot, you are aware, that, and because that is also the leitmotif, isn't it, of the tsunami itself, isn't it? And the other thing is, that through the visual, you have the drone shot that gives you this experience, the larger than life, where particularly, that long take of, the houses without the roofs,
Yes.
kind of. So I fully agree, that this kind of a technology, even at the lowest end, it enables us, so we can think of, so many other, very important projects, along these lines, that even with, certain kind of architectural landscapes we have and emotions, those kind of projects are now possible, even for, a student, because we have that kind of a technology available. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Please unmute yourselves, and you're welcome to ask.
Yeah, is it okay?
Yes,
Suresh.
please go
Yeah.
ahead. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Suresh, yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you, Babu, for the invite. Really appreciate it. And then great to meet Swarnavel sir. Yeah. I watched the documentary, and I would say it was really fascinating. And then to see how neutral is the view. There is absolutely no view actually in the documentary. Typical documentaries will come up with a view. And at the same time, even very profound points like, many women died compared to men because, they were clinging onto the kids. And also, of course, mentioned about the jewelry also. That basically really portrays the socioeconomic reality of that particular community. And also as a woman and the mother, right? If it was elaborated, I think a little bit, I think it would have been a little more, it would have been loud, and that effect would have been lost, is what I think. Where there is a complete, there is a emotion from the beginning of the document to the end, which is basically the concern and the grief. So nowhere that were disturbed. even though there were many things were shown in that. And then I think that was basically, I found it really fascinating. Even how the extended family concept in this community compared to maybe the way we live, or maybe the upper middle class or a middle class live. It was also a very profound point, but nothing beyond was mentioned in that. And I think it was left like that, which gave a very, very immersive experience for somebody to think, maybe to watch the documentary again and again, many times, I think, because just a passing remarks of 5 seconds, 10 seconds, I think can make you think maybe for quite a long, rather than, a lot of loud noise, and then where you get lost and then move on to the next scene. So, and also, this is also, I think, a common thread across what I have seen in Chennai flood as well as Kerala flood and all, especially how our people cope up in India. So I think that was also touched upon, and then people have moved on, but at the same time, the grief is still there when the commemoration day, yes, they have moved on, they became strong, but I think that pain is still there. So very profound, and then the way it is portrayed is, I think, really amazing. So I think it was great watch. So it would be good to know. I think you already told that it was neutral view you preferred. Maybe you would like to know if any of the views were a little bit elaborated. I think it would have been a little bit noisy. Is it so, or you thought, or it would have disturbed the emotion? So what would have been the reason to take the neutral view? It would be great to know.
Yes. Yes, no, it's an important question, that many of my students also ask, that particularly activist students, that, but which side you are on? I mean, that you might be aware, NGOs might not have done, as Revati repeatedly points out. So there was also a version I made, purely with NGOs, where other stories come up, One of the ladies here already, I mean, she was literally burnt by her husband. So she has gone through one trauma, and then she is coming to work in a relief and rehabilitation center to heal herself. Because this is what our psychiatrist doctor actually told. Despite a few years of treatment. So I met many, that's why I thought that waves from the deep. You go regarding one thing and so many other things, So then, when I'm making particularly this version, that where to stop, so that, people will also get an insight into, it doesn't look like, that it is only with other references that will be complete. So that, as you said, that you leave there, but you also know somewhere else, it is getting picked up. The other thing I also wanted to go back, what you are asking also goes back to, what, Murli sir here said, that the use of music. See, when you spoke about the emotions, I think, there were many reasons. One of the reason is, even if, the milieu is full of, songs from films, particularly of recent films, which a small filmmaker like me cannot use because, the copyright problems is there, because I also wanted to put it on YouTube so that people can access, so the choice is, that if you use certain kind of music, it will go through the algorithms of YouTube, and then they will say, you cannot monetize because, Saregama claims it's copyright thing. So we say yes, I don't need it. I'm not money, but I want to upload to it. I agree to Saregama because this is not a film which is going to have 100,000 hits in a week, so that it will come under the radar of Saregama. Because all that they ask is, if it does that kind of a business, we'll put advertisements in between your film. That is the thing, because then they will monetize. You are, because you are using their music. That music is important for me because that that correspondingly this discourse was going on about T.M. Krishna, isn't it? Of course, he is as a musician trying to take Carnatic music to the fringes. But for me, I mean, I am looking at it also from a pragmatic point of view, that what is the kind of music available for me. where I can use that and also upload it. This is the challenges of, making films from the fringes. So this is kind of, also, it is, according to me, contributing to the present discourse, not just, in going there, but also thinking about, how emotionally also we can match and close the divide, between the high and the low, particularly in the context of great musicians. Like if you look at, Santoor, the iconic Sharma also passed away, just last month. So, I feel even more, like, the moment I'm using, his music, through that a drone shot as it shows the new houses, it's a huge, heartfelt homage, to that kind of a music, which has its provenance in Kashmir. So these are, also discourses I'm invested, because, that here, there is no easy way for me to say, I mean, like, it is just like, that how then to, today think of, the music of Bach, isn't it? I mean, can you erase, that the churches from which it comes from, isn't it? I mean, isn't it? So then, around this discourse, I think, as filmmakers, we can do this. We can juxtapose their music, areas of emotions of this woman, isn't it? And I felt, that those kind of moments are, I should not be saying it, but very special about this version, because literally we'll find these long stretches of music and these long takes get punctuated, in key moments, with those kind of, small little changes in music, and here, what is happening, with the subject's frame within the camera. And that is where I think, it also becomes emotional. That is where I would say that if you ask me on whose side you are on, it is definitely, with the side of these people, because I am also not able to find a way through all my thinking to come out of the trauma. Just having, moved with them, not even, like, being in that land or having suffered, 0.00001% of the thing, but it affects you, isn't it? I mean, you go there, I mean, then you can imagine, what would have been the trauma. That is why the closure is important for me, that where, I'm trying, with all these things, to come out, that shot in, in that quote. That's a shot, that is a very important shot, where, that somebody like Revati, that's why I admire, that she chose to stay there. And it was important for me, to, and even today, just last month I heard Radhakrishnan attended the marriage, of one of the students from that school. So, like, I mean, I'm, what can I say? I'm so grateful to the documentary form, that I could meet these people and document them. That is what I would say, actually.
Thank you so much.
Okay, anyone else?
Nikhila, can you hear me?
Yes, Ajanta, please go ahead. Yes.
So good evening. So I am at VIT Vellore presently.
Yes.
And first of all, I want to acknowledge the fact of TFO, of course.
Yes.
And I think your documentary has opened up Tamil Nadu to me in a way that, staying here for 12 years did not. Yes, I was really absolutely overwhelmed. Of course, I knew about the tsunami, but there, so, and I don't know, our term is just beginning now, and I'm in the Department of English, and I would certainly recommend very strongly that all VIT students watch this.
Oh,
and it's really been an overwhelming experience, but I also have then a series of comments or questions. I'm still a bit overwhelmed.
Yes.
So one, of course, is that, I found exactly your form so interesting, because Freud says precisely this: you cannot register a trauma at the moment that it happens.
Yes.
The emotions are too overwhelming.
Yes.
It always takes a while.
Yes.
But it also, in a sense, never really goes away, and it cannot.
Yes.
So in a sense that I'm actually advising a PhD dissertation on representations of trauma. So I found your project interesting in so many ways. So
Yes.
I will keep many of my questions for later, but precisely this fact of time.
Yes.
And in some ways that you can never actually go back to that moment of origin. And in some ways it's going to stay
Yes.
with us, scar us all our lives.
Yes.
The second point that immediately came to my mind, and Babu sir spoke at the beginning of Oshani Shankar, I was actually thinking of Hungry Tide and Amitabh Ghosh,
Oh, yes.
because the ecosystem of the Sundarbans is very, very similar to the very, very kind of precarious lives that these people lead.
Yes.
And I was then thinking of Judith Butler and precarious lives, and how, in a sense, precisely that precarity has been sanitized out of philosophy.
Yes.
It's a history of technology, the generosity with which you've made the film.
Yes.
So and also the question that came up at the end. So I am not as well aware of the history of Tamil Nadu, but Mr. Radhakrishnan, this gentleman, is also at the forefront of the corona management, through.
Yes, he was, yes.
And so, but I greatly admire the fact that Ms. Revati has chosen to stay there. She's a hero. And I also think Gayatri Spivak's idea of being folded in with the enemy is very, very important.
Yes.
But Gayatri Spivak is not therefore saying that resistance is not necessary.
Yes.
And I'm making this point for now because, if you come to a campus like VIT, it's a completely sanitized campus.
Yes.
Right? And precisely because of the kind of world of which the NGOization is a symptom,
Yes.
we have students here who probably lived, as I have, in Tamil Nadu for 10 years, and
Yes.
I've never experienced in any kind of first-hand way the trauma, or intellectually that it happened. So the neoliberal grind that education too is going through.
Yes.
And you're right, technology has many possibilities, but I think the point that Ms. Revati makes at the start of rights as opposed to charity
Yes.
is so critical, especially in today's day and age.
Yes. Absolutely.
And through the corona crisis, and of course, you've been at the heart of it in the US,
Yes.
white supremacy, racist violence, monetization of medicine. So while she has chosen to stay on, and of course, you need to learn to live in a world without enemies. And that's the point that Spivak's making all the time. So I think so. First of all, I just want to say a huge thank you to Geeta and Nikhila for bringing me on board, for making such a fantastic documentary.
Yes.
And as I said, I hope that sometime, I will be, if it is at all right, I will, formally ask VIT to speak, to ask you to speak to our students.
Absolutely.
But this
Absolutely.
is, it's a world that's very, very divided. And irrespective of what Ms. Revati says, it has come at a cost, and the costs have been huge. And I thank you for this
I think we
fantastic
lost you,
opportunity.
Ajanta. Yeah, we briefly lost you.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Nikhila, I was just saying, if you come to VIT, I mean, the students here wouldn't know of this at all. They come from backgrounds that are, it's a floating population. They mostly come from Delhi, Madhya Pradesh, wherever.
Yes.
It's a campus where, of course, it's not that nothing is going on, but it's like your Ashoka or Flame or whatever. And the divide has become so dramatic. So
yes.
I think that the NGOization in that sense, and this charity as opposed to right, that discourse is very, very critical. And thank you. Thanks for this great platform.
Absolutely. No, I fully agree that you can see that, that is where I start my film, about the critique, of NGO. But at the same time, that it is also an intervention, we need, because, there are issues, or there are, pockets of population, the state cannot reach for so many reasons, because politics, precedes, commitment, to democracy, or the promises, they make in our constitution. So this becomes important in terms of, another kind of, when we read capitalism, how it has its own, the other streak. Of course, it comes with a baggage, I do not deny. But at the same time, I would also tell you that, after my generation, like me or Hariharan or Amshan Sir, Amshan Kumar or Arun Muli making documentaries. We have Amudan, Srinivasan, Leena Manimegalai, making films. And over the last, say, 20 years, I always supported the work, even though I know, that kind of filmmaking is even more difficult and complicated because film division stopped funding, documentaries after this Gorbachev effect. Or it became very scarce. NFDC almost disappeared, and they had to rely, for some of their works, on NGOs. So it comes with a baggage. But I know that, that they made some of the really great works, despite the impossibility of it, that they could make because of the digital one version. Then they could make their own version and upload. So that is where the possibilities lies, that because otherwise, see, we will be left out, and we are not contributing anything. You have to jump in. It will always, there will be a baggage, isn't it? So that's my take on it, and I also believe that because of the commercialization of education and the raping the Western models, what you say is largely true, of any institution in India at the present moment. But at the same time, that academia and educational spaces, are very important. If you look, in the West, if they had the flourishing, of documentaries or even experimental cinema, it's mostly because, that there was a period when, documentation, experimental film survived because some 200 universities will buy, at $200 one VHS tape. They know, the tape is literally worth maybe like $20. Why they are paying? Because as a community, it's our responsibility. The teachers will teach those courses, and it will reach a small segment of the students. It will touch their heart. So it's a very important intervention. We have to keep striving, without even really knowing who is our real target audience. But there is a space in academia, and that is important. I feel that it's important for academia, important for libraries in colleges to support this kind of alternative work, because that is where I think the real education takes place. But that is where they can relate to all these theories, of iconic figures like Butler. When they see something on the ground, why she says, gender is constructed. When they meet the trans woman on the road, and have a dialogue, and when they are touched and moved, isn't it? So that's why academia is important for me. That despite I know all the challenges, yes.
And thank you for such an inspirational film. Just really mind blowing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else would like to come in now?
So let me, thank all of you again, Nikhila, Geeta, and all the respondents, and Babu for spending.
Yeah, I think Tarakeshwar has unmuted himself before you. Thank
please.
the conversation.
Please.
Sorry, Swarnavel, for keeping you awake.
No problem. No problem.
No, thank you for the film, and thanks to Balu also for the introduction. And one of the issues that has come out in the discussion is about the time frame of the documentary, and that is quite interesting. You also mentioned about the anthropological mode of documentation and things like that. Yes. So the anthropologists, ethnographers keep going back to their field to see what transformations are happening, to theorize about the change, social change generally. Here also, the time factor plays an important role in this documentary. One is why there are no the rushes of the event itself, the trauma itself, because there's a few months gap between the event and the first shoot, and again the second one 10 years gap. So instead of simply giving vent to our emotions, we are trying to recollect them and then process it. So in that sense, patience is the key word here. Not let out our emotions, process it, and then see what happens. So waiting for it, waiting for 10 years, few months, 10 years, and then again going back and again shooting it, and then again coming out with it now. So there is some kind of a process that the film itself is undergoing, and the people who are part of the film or are also undergoing. So in that sense, the transformation within Revati in the first part and the second part is quite interesting in that sense. The another thing that what I found interesting was the reaction of the people themselves. There are no crying, wailing in the first part. They're shocked. They're trying to negotiate the new challenge. But in the second part, when there is a Memorial Day, they're crying and wailing, and they're singing the thing. So this, what they couldn't do in the first part, which was just few months, now they're trying to recollect it and then process it in their own way and giving vent to it in a very different way. Now at least they have some space to stand on and then do it. In a procession, they're doing it. But in the first part, that kind of wailing and crying is not there. So that itself is quite contrast to the other characters' transformations. So this time, the way it plays a role in this documentary, and the patience with which you went back and then processed this documentary for us. So that was quite interesting. Thank you for it.
Thanks a lot, Tarakesh. Thank you. I'm very moved, Tarakesh. So that is, it is, what you say is so important, because earlier, when I was, reading Butalia's book, on partition trauma, the great book, which she has co-authored, and then in, my
The Other Side of Silence. I think it's called The Other Side of Silence, no?
The Side of Silence.
Yeah.
You know that, that it takes time for them to even talk, so it takes time, to even for them to cry loudly. So thank you, Tarakesh, for pointing that out, because these are moments where we understand, how trauma is not something, which can be entirely resolved. Of course, one can claim, through an object of an image, as a filmmaker or somebody coming from outside, yes, everything is fine, but that a loss is a loss, and particularly a loss like this, that it's very difficult, to come to terms with, and that's, I think, also the purpose, of making, these kind of films. Why we are going, because we are realizing, that in some way they address, the void at the very center of our life, isn't it? As Professor Sarkar pointed out, it is like going back to Freud, that instead of somebody from who is in a seat of power listening to it, it's like a kind of mutual kind of healing. Even if the level of loss, sorrow, or trauma is incommensurable. It cannot be compared. But yet, I think documentary is one of the spaces, for that kind of work. So that is something I hold very dear to my heart as a documentarian, as a documentary teacher. Thank you, Tarakesh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. So thank you very much, Swarnavel, for spending this time with us talking about your film. We've all been moved very much by the film and also by this discussion has been very, very interesting. You've given us a sense of what brought you to the film. I saw the open, the dedication to your mother in the opening credits. So one can see the personal investment in the film and also get a sense of, how it was important to take the events happening here to your students in a very different set of circumstances and to kind of introduce them to what was happening here. Thank you everyone for joining this discussion. Babu Subramanian, thank you very much for obliging. It's a late hour. We always begin our discussion at 9. And it's pretty late on a Saturday evening. Thanks for joining and for making all those very important comments on the film. And thanks to everyone for joining in the discussion. So see you next Saturday with the discussion of.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so
What a
much.
treat. Thank you. Good night. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you.